All right, let's just jump right in. Most of us, we were taught a pretty simple path for money. Go to school, land a good job, and save, save, save. But what if that entire playbook isn't just a little outdated? What if it's completely obsolete? Today, we are diving deep into the controversial and, honestly, radically different financial philosophy of Robert Kiyosaki. So get ready, because this is probably going to challenge everything you think you know about money.
And yeah, he does not pull any punches. This single quote right here, this is the heart of his entire argument. He's basically saying that the financial advice our parents and grandparents live by is now the most direct path to financial struggle in today's economy. So that leaves one huge question, right? Why?
To really get his philosophy, first, we have to just tear down the old rules he believes are holding everybody back. Let's start by taking a hard look at the conventional wisdom most of us were raised on.
So Kiyosaki's core idea is that every single one of us has these three financial voices just warring inside our heads. The poor person voice, that one's driven by fear. The middle class voice craves security, that steady paycheck. But the rich person voice, that one is always looking for opportunity. The problem, he says, is that our whole system is basically designed to make us listen only to the first two.
So, what happened? What changed? Well, according to Kiyosaki, this is the moment the entire game was flipped on its head. Back in 1971, President Nixon cut the US dollar's link to gold, and from that point on, money wasn't backed by a real physical asset anymore. It was basically backed by debt, and it could be printed in unlimited amounts. This one event made all the old rules obsolete.
And this brings us to the first huge problem for anyone trying to save their money. The old rule was simple: put your money away, be diligent. But Kiyosaki asks a really simple question. Why would you save something when the government can literally print trillions of it out of thin air? That just devalues your savings every single day. In this new world, he argues, savers are losers.
And here it is, the second massive shift in thinking. We're all taught that debt is this big, scary monster, and we should get out of it as fast as we possibly can. But Kiyosaki says the rich, well, they just don't think that way at all. They've learned how to use debt not as something that crushes them, but as a powerful tool to buy up assets and get even richer.
So if the old rules are completely broken, what do we replace them with? Well, according to Kiyosaki, it all starts with a totally different way of thinking. It's about adopting an entrepreneurial mindset, even if you don't actually own a business right now. Now, this might be one of his most controversial ideas. A steady paycheck, that feels like security, doesn't it? But for Kiyosaki, it's a trap. He argues that the second you accept that paycheck, you adopt an employee mindset. You start to depend on it, you become a slave to money, and you stop thinking like a problem solver who creates their own way forward.
He actually illustrates this with this powerful story from his own life. When he decided to leave his job at Xerox, a coworker who had tried and failed before told him, "You'll be back." But Kiyosaki's response, well, it defined his entire future. He knew he was going to fail. He accepted that failure was just part of the process, but he made a commitment right then and there that he was never, ever coming back. That's the entrepreneurial attitude.
And this is exactly why, for Kiyosaki, getting rid of that safety net, that paycheck, forces you to evolve. It really does make you hungrier, it makes you smarter, it becomes this true test of your character. Are you going to become a crook when things get tough? Or are you going to dig deep and become a better, more resourceful person?
Okay, so we've got the mindset down, but what are the actual mechanics? Let's get into the nitty-gritty of how the rich use things like debt and taxes in ways the poor and middle class are just never taught.
Here it is. This is the fundamental divide. According to Kiyosaki, the two biggest expenses for most people, debt and taxes, are the very things the rich use to build their wealth. So while employees are out there working for money and getting taxed to death, the rich are busy creating businesses and acquiring assets that the system is actually designed to reward.
This right here shows how he puts it all together in a simplified and, yes, tax-free strategy. Let's just walk through it. First, an entrepreneur creates a business, it generates $1 million. Now, instead of paying huge taxes on that, they then invest it into an asset like real estate, which the government loves. Next, they go to a bank and borrow against that asset, getting millions in cash. And finally, and this is the key part, because that cash is a loan, it's debt, not income, and therefore, it's not taxed. They literally live off that tax-free loan.
The real-world impact of this difference is just staggering. Kiyosaki tells this story about his doctor, who was so excited to finally make $1 million in 1 year. But then the tax man came, and his take-home was closer to $400,000. Meanwhile, when Kiyosaki makes $1 million through his business and his investment strategy, he keeps the full $1 million. Why? Because he's not working for money in that traditional sense. He's playing by a totally different set of tax rules.
And check this out, a real-world example of using debt. While all the other financial gurus are screaming at you to get out of debt, Kiyosaki recently took on $300 million of it and then refinanced it at a super low interest rate of 2.5%. The result? His monthly costs went down and his cash flow went way, way up. He literally made a fortune by using debt intelligently. Now, all these external strategies, they're fascinating for sure, but Kiyosaki is so clear that none of them matter one bit without mastering this final piece of the puzzle. It all comes down to the one thing that you have absolute control over.
This brings us to his idea of two economies. See, we all live in an external economy. The stock market, government rules, what our boss decides. We can't control any of that stuff. But we each have our own internal economy, our mindset, our skills, our financial education, the choices we make, and that is the only thing we can control. For an entrepreneur, it's the only thing that really matters.
Kiyosaki uses this amazing analogy. When we buy a carton of milk, what do? We check the expiration date, right? But do we ever check the expiration date on our own knowledge? He brings up Moore's Law, which basically says that information doubles every 18 months. Think about that. It means if you're not constantly learning and updating your skills, your knowledge is becoming obsolete. Your most valuable asset isn't your job, it's your mind.
And this, right here, this is the ultimate payoff of focusing on your internal economy. Someone with a weak internal mindset gets absolutely crushed by failure. But a true entrepreneur, they just see failure as feedback. They fall, they learn, and they always stand back up, stronger, smarter, and just better than before. They can succeed in any external economy because their internal one is rock solid.
So that leaves us with one final and kind of challenging question. Are the old rules really serving you? Are you focused on just collecting that next paycheck, which is part of that external economy you can't control? Or are you focused on the one thing you can control, building your own internal economy through knowledge and a relentless entrepreneurial spirit? The choice, as Kiyosaki would say, is entirely